and welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'direi Torah. And,
Amen.
and we are actually on the very last Parsha of Genesis, Parsha of vaY'chi. It deals essentially with the death of the third of our patriarchs, of Jacob, and also ultimately of Joseph as well at the very end. But here we are in the middle of what is called the blessings, where Jacob blesses the 12 tribes. And we've gotten through many of them. So if you look on on my YouTube channel and look and put in vaY'chi, put in vaY'chi, you should be able to find the all the various sections that we've done up to this point. And this last section, of course, it's written in poetry, the blessings, quote blessings. And so of course there's lots of Rashi, as you can see. And we're going to take a look at the very last one, which is Benjamin, the youngest son, right? Binyamin Ze'ev Yitrof, okay? Benjamin, I believe this would be pronounced Yitrof, but it could be Yitraf. And maybe that is, in fact, that is the correct way to pronounce it. Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. So he did compare the tribes to various animals, by the way. Baboker yochal ad, in the morning he will consume booty, right? Something like that. Or the foe. The reason there's a question mark here is because this word here is unusual and there isn't absolute certainty as to what this means. But we'll see what Rashi has to say about it and the proof that he has regarding its translation. Ule'erev yechalek shlal, and in the evening he will divide the spoil. So one of the hallmarks of Hebrew poetry is something called parallelism. And so here you see in the morning he eats, right? He consumes this, and in the evening he divides this. So we can compare this to this, right? Because it's a parallel statement. And so shalal we know means spoil. And so we're thinking that ad has to mean the same kind of thing, basically the same concept. What is interesting, before I even look at the Rashi, is to look at Onkelos, who doesn't translate this literally at all. And I'm going to do this for you. Read the Aramaic and translate it as best as I can. And you'll see how he gives it completely a metaphoric understanding. Again, this is poetry. And Onkelos, of course, is very close to the traditional understanding of these particular passages and how they may well be understood more in a metaphoric sense, that is, these statements, and he'll give us the interpretation of that metaphor. So he says, Binyamin ba'ar'ei tishrei shchinte. He says, as for Benjamin, in his land, the divine presence will rest. Look at that, how different it is, right? Going on. Uva achsante yitbnei mikdashai. Makdasha. And in his portion, the Beit HaMikdash, right, the holy temple, will be built. But Safra Uvafanya, in the morning and in the afternoon, Yehon Makrivin Kahanaya Karbana, right? He says, in the morning and in the afternoon, the priests will offer up the sacrifices over Idan Ramsha, and at nighttime, in the evening, Yehon Mefalgin Motar Cholkahon, they will divide up the remnants of their portion, Misha'ar Kachaya, from the other holy sacrifice, in other words, holy objects, meaning the sacrifices, because there were parts of the sacrifices that would in fact go to the priests. And that would be done at the end of the day. So look at how he totally reworks the meaning of this particular passage. It's very interesting. So let's take a look at Rashi now. Here we are. Binyamin Ze'ev Yitraf, right? So Ze'ev who, so it compares Benjamin to a wolf, Asher, which Yitraf, right, is it takes it robs other things. It takes food. It takes other animals. It taref. You've heard the term trefa. Basically, it means torn up, right? So it tears up or snatches other things. Niba also, he prophesied, that's Jacob prophesied, al sheyu atidim liyot chatfanim, that in the future they would be robbers, snatchers. In other words, that somehow there'd be some kind of snatching, robbery, whatever that would take place later on. So we understand that these blessings of Jacob's are actually prophecies regarding each tribe. And there may be more to it than that. So, what's this reference to chatfanim? And robbers is probably too strong a statement, but it does mean snatching, and I did see that in Safaria. And in some ways, that's a good way of understanding it. Not exactly robbery per se, but taking away, snatching. Right? And this is a reference to Shoftin Kaf Aleph, Judges chapter 21. And here it is. I believe it's the either v'chitavtem or v'chataft, probably chitavtem lachem. You shall snatch for yourselves ish ishto, a man and his wife, right? A man, his wife. And has to do, Rashi tells us the reference is Pilegish Bagiv'ah. That has to do with the concubine in Gibeah. And that is a whole story in the book of Judges. It's a great tragedy. And without going into lots of details about this particular story, it has to do with the fact that this concubine was visiting or was at a certain place, and the tribe of Benjamin, people in the tribe of Benjamin abused her tremendously, tremendously. And as a result, the Israelites, the remaining Israelites, attacked the tribe of Benjamin. And in fact, they lost their women as a result, right? So in this case, the question is nobody wanted to marry anyone in the tribe of Benjamin. And so what happened was if you read in Judges 28, Judges 21, you'll see the story about how they went and they snatched women. These were unmarried women for themselves. When it says snatched, I think the women were willing to, in fact, become wives of the Benjaminites. But it's a very interesting story, and it has to do with this inner civil war that took place as a result of this terrible, terrible incident. So that's what Rashi's telling us.
The
But
translation of
yes,
snatch
yes,
in my
okay,
translation in our scroll
yes,
is grab and
right,
grabbers.
right, okay,
It,
that's good. I'll put that in actually. So
it's really
yeah.
a little bit of a different connotation.
Little bit. I did want to try and remove as much of the negative connotation of a robber,
Sure,
right?
sure.
But still, it does mean, obviously taking, not
Yep,
necessarily with a full agreement on the other side, etc.
yes.
Anyway, okay. V'niba al Shaul, and he prophesied regarding King Saul, shehiyeh notzech be'oivav, that he would be victorious with his enemies, saviv, around him. Shinemar, as it says, and this is Shmuel Aleph, this is the first book of Samuel, chapter 14, and the quote is, V'Shaul lakad hamlucha, Saul captured the monarchy. Vayilachem b'Moav, and he battled against Moab, over Edom and the Edomites, the Gomer, etc., over Chol Asher Yifneh Yarshia, and wherever he turned, he was able to condemn those particular other nations. So in this particular time period, there was a lot of contesting the land of Israel, and there were these other enemies. They weren't Canaanites. The Moabites and the Edomites clearly were not they were not part of the Canaanite nations, but there was a lot of unrest at the time. And of course, Saul had to try and take care of these things as king. And then later on, David was extremely successful, and the monarchy was secured under King David. Baboker yochal ad. So here, in the morning he will eat ad, right? This ad. He says that this term ad, lashon biza, it has the connotation of spoil, right, or plunder. V'shalal, same thing, right? Plunder, spoil, booty. Umit v'hamiturgam ad a. So this word, okay, here's the point he's making. He's saying that the Aramaic term for biza and shlal is ad a. Now, do you see how similar the word ada in Aramaic is to the word ad here in Hebrew? So that's the point he's making, is that in a sense, this word ad here in our text it's a borrowing from Aramaic, and that's not an unusual thing. We find Aramaic in Genesis as well, regarding Jacob and Laban. Laban is an Aramean. And of course, Abraham originally comes from Ur of the Chaldees. So there's a strong Aramaic connection. And of course, they are both Semitic languages. And so there is quite a little bit of similarity between this. So this is the way in which Rashi is helping us understand this term ad. V'od yesh lo domeh b'lashon ivrit. He says, and in fact, there are similarities in Hebrew itself. For example, in the book of Isaiah, chapter 33, az cholek ad shlal. Right, so there's the word ad shlal, and the word shalal is there right next to the word ad. And then at that point, he will divide a great spoil, is how Safaria translates this. The al Shaul hu omer, and this is said regarding Saul, she'amad betchilat bokran, and the reason why it's talking about in the morning and in the evening. So the morning, metaphorically, she's telling us, is that Saul was that first king at the beginning, betchilat bokran, at the beginning of their morning. Sfarim Achirim, there are other manuscripts or other versions of Rashi that say prichatan, meaning they're flowering. So remember that Saul was the very first king in Israel. This was the beginning of Israel's monarchy, and that's why, and because Saul was from the tribe of Benjamin, that's why in Jacob's blessing he talks about Boker, right, in the morning, Ozri Chatan Shel Yisrael, and the sunrise of Israel. So Rashi wants to help us understand the whole point, and it goes on, of course, Ula Erev Yechalek Shal, and in the evening he will divide the spoil. So if morning represents the flowering and sunrise of Jewish history in terms of the land of Israel, the evening has to represent its decline, right? Af mi shenishtaka shimshan. So again, speaking metaphorically, and even when their sun set, Shel Israel of Israel, al Yedei Nebuchadnezzar, at the hands of Nebuchadnezzar, sheyiglam levavel, because he would in fact exile them to Babylonia. Yechalek shlal, he will divide the spoil, and they're going on. This, remember, this is in Babylonia now, dividing the spoil. So what dividing spoil took place after Nebuchadnezzar had exiled the best and brightest of the Jewish people of Israel to Babylonia? This is a reference to Mordechai, who's also from the tribe of Benjamin. That is stated quite explicitly in the book of Esther. So Mordechai and Esther, Shehemi Binyamin, because they were from the tribe of Benjamin. Yichalku et shlal Haman, they would in fact divide up the spoil of the house of Haman. Shinemar, as it states, and so Rashi's quoting here, Hine, this is what Achashverosh says to them, Hine Beit Haman, here is the house of Haman, Natati le Esther, I have given it over to Esther. But Onkelos and Rashi, of course, is not oblivious to how Onkelos translates this passage, which is different from the way he just explains it. But Onkelos tigem al shlal hakohanim, and regarding the shlal there, he says he translates it into Aramaic regarding the quote spoil of the kohanim bekocheh mikdash, regarding the sanctified offerings, the offerings that were in the temple. So he gives us that understanding that he understands this particular verse referring to that. Going on. So you can see this poetry there's huge amounts of Rashi on this material because of the metaphoric meanings, and even the Hebrew itself isn't easy Hebrew to understand. So this is it. Kol ele shivtei Israel, all these, the tribes of Israel, Shnei Masar, 12, all 12 of them, Vezot asher diber lahem avihim, and this is what their father spoke to them, Vayivarech otam, and he blessed them. Ish asher kevirchato, each man according to his blessing, Beirach otam, he blessed them. And Rashi is going to deconstruct this sentence as we come to the end of this section here. Vezot asher diber lahem avihem vayivarchotam, right? And this is what their father said to them, and he blessed them. So Rashi points out, if you go back and look at these, quote, blessings, some of them don't sound like such blessings. V'halo yesh mehem shelo birkam, and there are some of these statements where he wasn't exactly blessing them, ela kantaran, he was criticizing them, right? Ela kach pirushu. So we need to understand it this way. V'zot asher diber lahem avihem, right? So in other words, as to what their father actually spoke to them, ma shenemar b'inyan, and then that's a reference to what is said in the passage that we read. In other words, those specific words that we read, these were what he said to them. Yachol sheleb. So if we just read that, Yachol shelo berech leReuven, Shimon, v'Levi. It's possible that he didn't bless Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Talmud Lomar, and for that reason, Scripture goes and says explicitly, Vayivarech otam, that he blessed them, kulam b'mashma. That refers to all of them. In other words, even if the words that we read in the passages don't sound like a blessing, nevertheless, when it came to them as a group, Jacob included Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. They were all blessed. That's how he understands this. Ish asher kevirchato, each man according to his blessing. Bracha ha'atida lavo. In other words, according to his blessing. What do we mean according to his blessing? We're talking about the blessing ha'atida lavo that would come in the future al kol echad ve'echad on each and every one. So each one of them, as the future rolled out, would be blessed in a particularly unique kind of way. Berach otam, he blessed them. Lo hayalo lomar. But he says, if you look at the sentence in the Hebrew, it's a little strange. It says, it should have actually said, Ella ish asher kevirchato. It should have said, right, beirech oto. It should have said, each person, each man, according to his blessing, he blessed him. In other words, it's talking about each individual, so it should have Beirach Oto, he blessed him, Oto. But it doesn't say that, right? Ma Talmud Lomar Beirach Otam. So why does it say he blessed them? Why in the plural? The fish Natan Lehuda Gurat Ari. The reason is that he attributed to Judah the power, the strength of a lion, Ulevenamin Chatifato Shel Za'ev, and to Benjamin he attributed the snatching or the grabbing of a wolf. Naftali, and to Naftali, Kaluto Shel Ayala, he attributed to Naftali the fleetness, the speed of a deer. Yachol shelo kilelam kulam b'chol brachot, and maybe so he didn't include all of them in these specific blessings. In other words, when we read about the blessings, there are these specific blessings to each one of them. And what Rashi is saying, is it possible that he didn't include the others in the individual blessings that he gave? Talmud Lamar Beirachotam. And for that reason, he says he blessed them. In other words, the implication being that even though it says to Judah a lion, and it says to Benjamin a wolf, and it says to Naphtali a deer, he included those qualities to all of them. He blessed them all with these qualities. They were all included. And that's the force of Beirach Otam. He blessed them, the Otam, the plural. Vayitzav otam, and he commanded them, Jacob commanded them, Vayomer alehem, and he said to them, Ani ne'esaf el ami, I am being gathered to my people. Kivru oti el avotai, bury me, and literally it means to my fathers, right? El Hamara, to the cave, Asher Biste Ephron Hachiti, that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite. Let's see what there is here. Ne'esaf Elami. So this beautiful statement, right? Gathered to my people. Al Shem Shemachnisin Uto. So why this idea of gathering? And Rashi's going to tell us that this gathering has more of a connotation of bringing in, right? Not just simply, I mean, people gather for a meeting, all right? But here this has to do with bringing in. And this is said, this is for the reason, Shemachnisim hanefashot, because the souls, right, are gathered el makom gnizatam, to the place where they are stored. Sheyesh asifa b'lashon ivri, because sometimes this word asifa, to gather, in Hebrew, shehi lashon hachnasa, that it has the connotation, I think, would be of bringing in. Kagon, and he gives examples. Judges 19, ve'ein ish ma'asef otam habaita, and no one gathered them to his home, right? Home. And in Deuteronomy chapter 2, ve'asafto el toch beitecha, and you shall gather it into your homes. So it isn't just people coming together or things being gathered, it's meaning gathered to a place. And likewise, Leviticus chapter 23, Be'ospachem et tuat haaretz, when you gather the produce of the land, hichnastem labayit, you shall gather, you shall bring it in to the house, mipnei ha-geshamim, for the reason, because on account of the rain, so that the produce wouldn't rot. Right, so this Tuat Haaretz is the end of the quote, and he's explaining the reason why it had to be that where it says Ba'ospachem, when you gather, it wasn't just gathering, it was bringing them into the house so that they, on account of the rains, so that they wouldn't rot. Ba'ospechem et ma'asechem, when you bring in, right, when you gather your labors. V'chol asifa amura b'mita, right? And when it talks about asaf, when it uses this verb with regards to death, af hi lashon achnasa. It too has to do with the idea of gathering in. El avotai, to my ancestors or to my fathers. Im avotai. So the El too means with my fathers. I shall be come back to be with my fathers when I die. Going back now. Next verse. Bima'ara, this is of course referring to that cave where he was telling them to take him. Bima'ara, in the cave Asher, which is in the Bistei HaMachpelah, in the field of the Machpelah, Asher al Pnei Mamre, which is facing Mamre. I felt al Pnei had more to do with the idea of it was nearby Mamre, but Eretz Canaan, in the land of Canaan, because of course they're in Egypt right now when he's speaking to them. Asher Kana Avraham, which Abraham purchased et hasadeh, the field, ba'et Ephron hachiti, from Ephron the Hittite, the achuzat cover, as a possession, I would say, of a grave, right? So in other words, it should be a place designated for burial. I think let's see, right, the next Rashi is Lamed Gimel, so we're going to keep going. Shama kavru et Avraham et Sarah ishto. There they buried Abraham and Sarah his wife. Shama kavru et Yitzchak. There they buried Isaac, et Rivka ishto, and Rivka his wife. V'shama kavarti et Leah, and there I buried Leah. Miknei hasadeh v'hama'ara, so the purchase of the field and the cave, Asher Bor, which was within it, Ma'et b'nei Chet, from the children of Chet. And I think there's a lot of significance, the fact that this was purchased, the idea of it being an outright possession of Abraham and his descendants, so that there was no dispute at all from as to who had the right to this particular cave. And we know, of course, the rights of possession are something that are argued over, and there are many legal cases that come about because of these particular issues. Vayichal Yaakov letzavot et panav, and Jacob ceased. He came to the end of commanding his sons, ve'esof raglav elamita, and he gathered in his legs into the bed, vayigva, and he literally it means the Sefaria translates it as expired. Vayigva has to do, Jastrow translates it as fell away, right? He no longer was functioning as a living human being. Vaye'asef, and he was gathered el amav, to his people, gathered to his people. Vaye'esof raglav, ichnis raglav. He brought his legs into the bed, right? That's what he did. Vayigva vaye'asef. And he fell away and he was gathered. Umita, he says, and the point is it doesn't say vayamot. It doesn't say he died. Umita lo ne'emrabo. And there was no, the statement death itself wasn't stated regarding him. For Amru Razal, and our sages of blessed memory said, Yaakov Avinu, I'm sure, Jacob, our patriarch, lo mate. He didn't die. And this is from Tractate Tanit, chapter 5. And we're going to end here for today, God willing, into the very last chapter of Genesis as we move into it. So I'm going to stop the share. If there are any comments anyone has about what we're doing. Any,
Yeah, I was
yeah,
wondering how many people were buried in the cave at Hebron? It was Sarah and Abraham, Isaac, and I know Rachel wasn't buried.
Rebecca.
Moses wasn't buried
No,
there.
Moses was buried on Mount Nebo.
Yeah.
Correct.
Uh,
The
who
only,
was
go on.
who else was Joseph buried there?
No, no, he was
Joseph
not.
wasn't buried there.
He was ultimately buried in the land of Israel, okay? But he wasn't the only other person that isn't mentioned explicitly is that there's a tradition that Adam and Eve were buried there as well.
Oh, I didn't
So you've
know
got
that.
Adam and Eve, Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, and Jacob and Leah. So we
And
have
and, and Rachel
Rachel's buried in Bethlehem.
on
She's buried
Bethlehem.
in Bethlehem. Right. That's where she died. She died near Bethlehem, and that's where
Why didn't he take her to the cave? I don't get it.
it's a wonderful question. Um, and I don't know that I can answer it as well as you deserve, but I will tell you that some people say, because of a reference in Jeremiah, that Bethlehem is on the border of the land of Israel, so that when the Jewish people were exiled to Babylonia, they passed by Rachel's tomb. And they say that Rachel was crying over, even though she was obviously deceased, but in a way it was saying that Rachel was crying and pleading to God on behalf of the Jewish people. So the
Wow.
reason she was buried in Bethlehem was because of that future incident that would happen. The only other way I could go, because we know that Rachel was Jacob's beloved wife. And in some ways, there's tragedy involved in that she was, to begin with, she was barren for such a long time. And then the other thing is, of course, she died in childbirth. And I think in some ways, for me at any rate, it emphasizes a certain level of tragedy involved in Rachel and Jacob's life, in that she wasn't buried. But I think the other reason that I can give you for burying Leah at the Machpelah is because remember, Leah had 10 of the 12 children.
Yes.
Well, I
Yes.
mean, not actually six, because
Six,
Yeah.
yeah,
Four of them were
yeah,
from the maidservants, right? But she
yeah.
had the vast majority of children, and that put her in a particular position. And in some ways, you could say it was consolation for the way she had been treated in a way through her life, right? That even though she was Jacob's first wife, she wasn't treated as his first wife because she had to know that Jacob was in love with Rachel. So
Hmm.
there are complexities there that are in some ways highlighted by the fact that she wasn't buried, that she was ultimately buried along with Jacob in the cave of Machpelah.
Hmm.
So, but I'm sure there's more to it than I'm capable of, recollecting right this moment, or, be something that as I study, hopefully I'll find out more and I'd be able to answer your question better. So with this, I think I'm going to stop the recording.